A group of elderly criminals broke into an impenetrable vault that held hundreds of safe deposit boxes full of jewelry, gold, and cash. The loot stolen from the heist was reported to be worth an estimated £14 million. Although the youngest among them was in his 60s, they managed to carry out the perfect crime. This operation served as their pension plan and their last job. It was one of the most audacious and biggest heists in British history. However, a small mistake would lead to their arrest. In this video, we will uncover the thrilling details, the meticulous planning, and the astonishing execution of a crime that unfolded right in the heart of London's Diamond District. Let us unravel the mystery behind the Hatton Garden heist. In April 2015, a group of elderly thieves drilled into the vault wall of the Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Company and carried out a sophisticated heist, stealing valuables such as cash, jewelry, and other items from safety deposit boxes. The Hatton Garden has been London's Diamond District for centuries. It is an area in London with wall-to-wall jewelry shops, and all the jewelry dealers in that area used to keep their valuable items in the Hatton Garden Safety Deposit. The Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Company, located in the Hatton Garden area of London, is a facility that provides secure storage for valuable items in individual safety deposit boxes. Customers, often individuals or businesses, rent these boxes to store items such as cash, jewelry, important documents, and other valuable possessions. It was built back in the 40s, and it was considered impenetrable due to its high level of security features, including surveillance cameras, access controls, and other measures to protect the contents of the safety deposit boxes until these elderly thieves proved that it was a lie. The Hatton Garden heist was carried out by a gang of 6 elderly thieves. The oldest one is Brian Reader, who was 76 at the time of the robbery. We can say that he was the mastermind. Reader had been jailed before for notorious robbery and accused but found not guilty of murdering an undercover police officer. Terry Perkins celebrated his 67th birthday during the raid and was involved in all stages of the operation, including disposing of the stolen goods. He is diabetic and suffers from heart problems. Perkins had participated in the robbery of Security Express's vaults in 1983, which was considered the biggest cash raid in British history. John Collins, also known as Kenny, was a 64-year-old man with a criminal record in robbery stretching back to 1961. He was the gang's driver and lookout. Danny Jones, the youngest of the gang, aged 60, is an experienced criminal with convictions for burglary, attempted robbery, and handling stolen goods dating back to 1975. Carl Wood is another member of the gang with a criminal history of theft and robbery. The group's last member is called Basil, but it is not his real name, and he was dubbed the Ghost because the detectives didn't manage to get any information about him. He even used a wig during the operation, and he was in charge of disabling the alarm, since he was an expert in electronics. There were 2 others, but they weren't directly involved in the robbery. They only provided assistance to the gang after the robbery. Based on this information, it turns out that these thieves, despite their old age, have experience in theft, as what they all have in common is their criminal record in the field of theft and robbery. Their criminal records indicate that they have been involved in numerous theft and robbery cases in the past. This suggests that their age does not hinder their ability to carry out successful thefts, highlighting their expertise in this criminal activity. They may seem old-fashioned and incapable of handling such big heists due to their old age, but they were still trying to carry out the perfect crime of their lives. The gang, led by Brian Reader, had spent 3 years meticulously planning the heist. First, they divided up the roles among themselves, deciding who would be the driver, the lookout, the leader, etc. They had also watched YouTube videos on how to operate a massive drill to breach the vault's thick concrete wall. Additionally, they read Forensics for Dummies to hide their tracks and not leave any evidence against them behind. It is a simplified guide introducing various aspects of forensic science, covering topics such as crime scene investigation, evidence analysis, DNA testing, and digital forensics in an accessible way for a general audience. The book, by the way, was found in Danny Jones's house after he was arrested. The gang has completed all of the necessary preparations and is now ready to carry out their plan. The only thing left is to choose the date of the heist. The gang chose the Easter weekend to carry out the heist. They likely chose this particular time for strategic reasons. The Easter weekend is an extended holiday period, giving the criminals more time to execute their plan without arousing suspicion. Additionally, as mentioned before, the Hatton Garden Safety Deposit is located in the center of London, in an area that is known for jewelry and diamond businesses, the majority of which would be closed. So, choosing that particular period will ensure that the vault will be closed and there will be minimal activity in the area, reducing the chances of witnesses or interruptions. On Thursday, April 2, 2015, the eve of the Easter weekend, after the Hatton Garden staff had locked the doors, the gang arrived at 8:20 p.m. in a white van driven by John Collins, except for Brian Reeder, the leader, who came by bus using a free pensioner's pass. They parked the van on a nearby street. Two of the gang members dropped off, Danny Jones and Carl Wood, dressing as maintenance workers. They were wearing reflective jackets. They went to take a look at the target building and then walked away. At 9:20 p.m., Basil appeared. He was walking towards the building carrying a black bin bag on his shoulder to avoid surveillance cameras. Basil entered the building through the main front door using a key he had somehow gained. He then immediately went through the building to the fire escape side door and opened it from inside. Moments later, the white van of the gang pulled up, and they began unloading their tools using wheelie bins in which they were planning to smuggle the loot out of the building. Afterward, Collins, the driver, went away to park the van around and positioned himself as the lookout man in one of the apartments in a building opposite the Hatton Garden Safety Deposit. The lookout location was meticulously chosen, as it allowed him to keep an eye on both the front and side doors, so he could warn his mates whenever needed using a walkie-talkie. As mentioned before, the gang members are old-fashioned. At that time, the gang, carrying their tools, entered the building from the fire escape side door, made their way down the basement courtyard, broke into the basement through another door, and waited with the equipment next to an airlock-controlled door that leads to the vault area. Two of them went upstairs to the second floor, called the elevator, and disabled it. They descended back to the ground floor, opened forcibly the elevator shaft's outer door, and lowered themselves down to the basement. At the bottom there was a metal shutter. They opened a part of it and crawled under, making their way to the basement area where the vault is located. Under the stairs, there was a small room where the controls for airlock doors, surveillance cameras, and the alarm system were located. Basil, the electronics man, disabled them and cut the power to the airlock door, letting the other members in with the equipment. Now that all the gang members were in the basement area, the only thing separating them from the vault was an iron bar door. Using an angle grinder, they cut through the iron bar door. But while doing this, something unexpected happened. Although Basil had disabled the alarm system, a message was sent to the building security company, which sent one of its guards to check whether there was something suspicious or it was just a false alert. Normally, in a similar case, the police should be informed, but when the security guard came, he checked the front door lock, and it was normal. He then went to the side door, and there was nothing that aroused suspicions. Therefore, he reported nothing, and the police didn't show up. The irony is that while all of this was going on, John Collins, the lookout man, was sound asleep. Luckily for them, there was nothing strange outside the building. After cutting the iron bars of the door, the gang was in front of the Hatton Garden vault door. Their plan was to break through the wall of the vault, which was a half-meter thick concrete wall. They were half a meter from the untold wealth. Of course, it is almost impossible to break through such walls unless they have special heavy-duty equipment. For this reason, they brought a massive drill. Normally, not everyone is eligible to use such equipment, And for most people who want to learn something, YouTube is the right option. The gang, in the preparations phase, had watched YouTube videos on how to use that massive drill and became good at using it. They placed the massive drill on the wall next to the vault door and started drilling. During the drilling operation, the gang had mixed feelings. They were happy as they remembered the old days when they carried out other burglaries, and they were also afraid because if they were arrested, they would absolutely die in prison. For them, it was not about money, but if they succeeded, they would be the protagonists of the biggest heist in Britain's history. The heist that would immortalize their names in British history and make them legends in the eyes of future generations. It is true that they are criminals, but not ordinary ones. They were in their 60s and 70s and about to pull off the biggest heist in Britain's history. After hours of drilling, they penetrated the wall. They made 3 circular holes, overlapping side by side, through which they intended to get into the vault. They peered inside the hole, and there was a surprise. The gang made the 3 holes in the back of a safety deposit box cabinet, meaning that on the other side of the drilled wall, there was a safety deposit box cabinet that was bolted to the ceiling and floor, which made it impossible to be pushed over. This was a shock for the gang. They were frustrated at the time because, despite all the planning and preparation, this detail was not taken into account. At that particular moment, the plan had failed and a decision had to be made. Brian Reeder, the leader, decided to leave, and then see what is next. The gang made their way out through the fire escape side door. Carrying their tools, their white van driven by Collins was waiting for them. They got on and left. Brian Reeder made the decision to leave the building after their plan had failed. Moreover, he decided to pull out. He didn't want to go back to the Hatton Garden to finish what they had started because he strongly believed that once going off the plan, that's when mistakes would be made. Besides, Brian Reeder was the oldest and couldn't bear all the stress. So, he didn't want to take the risk. That's why he decided to pull out and told the other members to do the same. For the others, the loot was too tempting that they couldn't give up. They tried to convince him, but Brian was stubborn and refused to carry on their plan. Eventually, the other members decided to go back without their leader, Brian Reeder. After extensive thinking, the gang members found out that they needed a hydraulic pump to push over the safety deposit box cabinet. That's why, on Saturday afternoon, John Collins and Danny Jones went in a distinctive white Mercedes to an equipment superstore, looking for a hydraulic pump. John Collins pulled up next to the store. Danny Jones entered to make the purchase, and a few moments later, he came out with the needed tool, put it in the car trunk, and then they left. At night, they drove around the Hatton Garden building to see if things were going right or if someone had discovered the robbery. On late Saturday night, Basil let the gang in as the first night. They entered through the fire escape side door, and on their way to the basement, there was a light. Carl Wood, one of the gang members, was nervous about that light. He then immediately decided to pull out. The other members tried to calm him down and reassure him that it wasn't a big deal and that there was nothing to worry about. However, Carl Wood persisted in leaving. He told them that they shouldn't have come back again and should have listened to Brian Reeder because this might have been a trap set by the police. There are now only 4 people left. Danny Jones, Basil, and Terry Perkins were the 3 inside the building, while the 4th one, John Collins, was on the lookout spot. After Carl Wood had left, the remaining members carried on their plan to complete what they had begun before. As previously stated, this time the gang brought a new tool. It was a hydraulic pump that applied 10 tons of pressure. They set it up, and with a huge crack, the safe deposit cabinet was pushed over, making millions of pounds worth of cash, gold, and jewelry within their reach. Danny Jones and Basil entered the vault through the drilled holes. They started breaking the safety deposit boxes and handed them over to Perkins outside the vault through the opening. Perkins' task was to sort the contents of the safety deposit boxes. He used to take the cash, jewelry, gold, diamonds, and all the valuable items, and put them inside the wheelie bins, and throw away anything with less value for him, such as the documents. Out of the 999 safety deposit boxes that were inside the vault, the gang only managed to break into 37 boxes. The reason is not known. Maybe that's all that they could carry inside those wheelie bins. However, the stolen loot was significant, making it the biggest heist in history. In the end, the gang made their way back through the building's side door, where Collins was waiting for them with his white van. They loaded the wheelie bins full of treasure, got on, and left the area. On Tuesday, April 7, 2015, the first day after the Easter weekend, everyone in the Hatton Garden area went back to work normally, including jewelry traders and the Hatton Garden safe deposit staff, and that's when the robbery was discovered. The police were immediately informed. They arrived around 8:00 a.m. and started investigating the crime. When they entered the vault, they found it in a total mess. Everything was covered with dust and debris, with empty, broken deposit boxes thrown on the floor, besides the power tools used in the break-in. The traders and the local businesses were devastated because all their valuable items and money were stored in the Hatton Garden safe deposit, and their businesses would be affected by the robbery. They couldn't believe that such an impenetrable vault had been robbed, and the robbers entered the building, stole their possessions, and left without any police intervention, although the safe was equipped with an alarm system. The incident left the clients of the Hatton Garden safety deposit feeling vulnerable and questioning the effectiveness of their security measures. Consequently, the police officers were forced to apologize, stating that the security procedures weren't followed by the security company, as they received an alert from the Hatton Garden alarm system, but it wasn't taken into consideration, while in fact, they should have called the police, and due to this mistake, the vault had been robbed. Firstly, the detectives started by examining the crime scene, hoping to find a lead on the robbers. They were looking for a starting point, which could be a fingerprint or a DNA sample. They meticulously combed through the area, carefully looking for any potential evidence that could provide crucial insights into the identity of the perpetrators. Unfortunately for them, the gang had been careful in the vault and left no forensic clues. According to some detectives, there were some bleach bottles at the crime scene, which is a chemical liquid that the gang used to deteriorate their fingerprints. They had also taken the surveillance hard drives, so no pictures of them were found. The investigators were left empty-handed, with no leads to pursue. Still, this had provided the detectives with a better understanding of the people they were dealing with, and they realized that they were persuading a skilled gang that was knowledgeable about forensics, which would make their mission hard to accomplish successfully. Furthermore, the timing of the heist put the detectives in serious trouble, giving the gang an advantage and putting the police on the defensive. The police are now forced to arrest the members of the gang before disposing of the stolen items. It is like a race against time, which puts the police under extreme pressure. Although the gang had prepared the heist with great care, it appears that they overlooked one important detail. London is one of the cities that has surveillance cameras installed throughout, meaning that every single corner of the city is covered. This marked the initial achievement of the police. The extensive surveillance coverage proved to be a crucial breakthrough for the police, as it provided them with valuable footage of the culprits on the night of the heist. They managed to take a look at the gang's white van, the two men disguised as maintenance workers, and Basil, who was carrying a bag bin on his shoulder to avoid surveillance cameras. This footage allowed the police to build a picture of how the burglary happened. The detectives concentrated on the van. Using its license plate, they could determine who had bought it, but it wasn't a real name. This led them to conclude that the van had been bought specifically for this job, and the gang had disposed of it thereafter. So the van was a dead end. The surveillance cameras had also revealed an important thing. On Friday morning, the gang appeared on the cameras, leaving the building without any bags of the stolen loot. It shows that the gang returned on Saturday night for a second attempt, and the next morning, they came out with the wheelie bins full of the loot and loaded them on the van. This proved to the detectives that the burglary was carried out on 2 tries. The gang couldn't get what they had come for on the first night for unknown reasons, but their second attempt was successful. While studying the footage, the detectives discovered the error made by the gang that would lead to their downfall. Around an hour before the second break-in, John Collins appeared on surveillance cameras, driving his own white Mercedes around the Hatton Garden safety deposit. As we mentioned before, John Collins drove around the building before the second break-in to check if someone had discovered what they were doing. The thing that made the detectives suspect that car specifically was that Collins drove around the building multiple times, and this was a massive error made by Collins that would open up the entire investigation. In order to identify the identity of that white Mercedes' owner, the police traced the car using surveillance cameras and automatic number plate recognition, a technology used to detect wanted criminals that are using a particular car. When the vehicle passes an ANPR camera, its registration number is read and instantly checked against database records of vehicles of interest. The police traced the car, and it led them to a residential area where they found the car parked. Now all they had to do was keep the car under surveillance to know who was using it. By keeping the car under surveillance, the police were able to know that an elderly man was regularly using that vehicle. His name is John Collins. The police had finally managed to identify the first member of the gang. By not arresting him immediately, the police hoped to leverage his involvement to gain crucial information about the remaining members. After several days of surveillance, the police observed John Collins meeting a man in a cafe just half a mile from the Hatton Garden. At first, the police didn't suspect him, but after checking John Collins's phone records, they got his name. It was Brian Reeder. The detectives realized that the surveillance would take them time to arrest all the members, which would give the gang more time to dispose of all the loot. And the police wanted to retrieve as much as they could of the stolen loot. So they offered a £20,000 reward to anyone who could provide them with a lead on the gang. Unlike what was expected, many people didn't take the robbery seriously. On the contrary, the gang got sympathy from the public, as they were old and still trying to carry out such a crime, and also because no one was injured or killed during the operation. This unexpected public sympathy made it even more challenging for the police to gather information on the gang's whereabouts. Additionally, the media coverage of the robbery portrayed the gang as somewhat heroic figures, as they managed to break into a vault that was considered impenetrable despite their old age. The police now had no other option than surveillance to prevent the loot from disappearing. John Collins was followed by the police when he drove to a pub in North London, where he met with Terry Perkins and Daniel Jones. Until now, 4 members were identified by the police: John Collins, Brian Reeder, Terry Perkins, and Daniel Jones, and they were all put under surveillance. The police were determined to gather as much evidence as possible to ensure a successful arrest. They closely monitored the activities and interactions of the identified members, hoping to uncover crucial information about their plans and potential accomplices. The detectives were also searching and checking their phone call records. One of the things that was discovered was a phone call on the afternoon of the second break-in, made from Collins' phone to a tools superstore, in which he asked about a hydraulic pump. By studying the surveillance footage, John Collins appeared driving his white Mercedes along with Daniel Jones on Saturday afternoon. Hours before the second break-in, they went to the store, and Daniel Jones entered to make the purchase. Here, he made another error. He gave his real name and address, and he was spotted on the store's surveillance cameras. On May 1, 2015, nearly a month later, the police still needed more evidence to connect these men to the crime. On Friday, Collins and Perkins met with Reeder at a pub for a drink, and an undercover police officer followed them inside the pub to film them with a hidden camera. He was so close to him that all their faces were captured clearly. They were meeting up to tell Reeder how the second night was after he had pulled out. Or maybe Reeder was asking for his share of the loot, as he was the one who planned for this job. The thing that would make the police certain that these old men were the ones who carried out the Hatton Garden heist was that Perkins was demonstrating how they used the hydraulic pump to push over the safe box cabinet, as it was the only part of the plan that Reeder didn't know about since he pulled out on the first night. The police had known all these details by providing the recorded video to a lip-reading expert who gave them a transcript of what the three were talking about. This was a crucial breakthrough in the investigation that allowed the police to get a special authorization to bug Collins and Perkins' cars so they could eavesdrop on their calls and conversations, hoping to identify the remaining members. After a few days of eavesdropping on the gang's calls and conversations, the police heard a name for the first time: Carl, referring to Carl Wood. The bugs revealed that Brian Reeder and Carl Wood pulled out after the first night and didn't return with the others on the second night. After identifying 5 members of the gang, the detectives kept eavesdropping and monitoring the identified members to get the identity of the 6th member, Basil. Through the calls and conversations of the gang members, the police discovered that Basil was the electronics man who disabled the alarm system and the one who helped the gang gain access to the building. After 6 weeks, the detectives hadn't found a lead on Basil yet. He was never picked up on the bugs or captured on surveillance. The only picture they had of him wasn't clear enough to identify his identity. The police now concentrated on these 5 identified members, so they could recover as much as possible of the loot without wasting more time. The detectives had learned through the bugs that after the burglary, the gang took the loot to Collins' house, where they were planning to keep it until the divvy was up. Collins did not manage to keep the loot because of his wife, who was coming the next day, so they decided to divide the loot until they arranged a date and found a place for the divvy, and then everyone would take his share. Collins gave his portion to his brother-in-law, Bill Lincoln, while Daniel Jones buried it in a cemetery. Even though the detectives were aware that the loot was spread out across several locations, they chose to wait to apprehend the gang in order to recover a sizable portion of the loot that had been stolen. After more than 6 weeks of the heist, the gang had finally arranged a meeting where all the portions would be collected and then taken to another place for the divvy. The gang agreed on a meeting behind a pub. They would bring the loot in a taxi and then hand it over to Collins' car. Right after that, they would head to Perkins' daughter's house. Perkins had already sent her daughter away to use his house. The detectives were monitoring all of these movements through the city surveillance cameras and were ready for any potential intervention. Finally, all the gang members met at Perkins' daughter's house, and while they were preparing for the divvy, the police raided the house and the property of every associate of the gang. The gang members were caught off guard by the sudden police raid, causing chaos and panic to ensue. As a result, their plans for the divvy were completely disrupted, leaving them in a state of disarray and uncertainty about their future. After the home search operation that followed the arrests, the police recovered gold, jewelry, diamonds worth about a third of the £14 million that was stolen from the vault. After they were arrested, Reeder, Collins, Jones, and Perkins pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit burglary, avoiding trial and reducing their sentences from a mandatory 10 years. Reeder was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months, while the others were sentenced to 7 years. As for the mysterious Basil, he had disappeared after the robbery, and the police didn't manage to identify him until 3 years later. After extensive work on the surveillance cameras and connecting the dots, they were able to get his name, Michael Seed. The court found him guilty and sentenced him to 10 years. An ex-armed robber stated that the gang members wouldn't have been in jail if their performance was like Basil, who kept evading capture for years. The police announced that only 4 million of the stolen amounts were recovered, while the other 10 million were still missing. It seemed that each one of the robbers hid a share and didn't bring all the loot to the divvy. Although the heist was meticulously planned, the gang of the elderly man was caught due to trivial errors. One of the gang members used his personal vehicle, another gave his name and address while buying a tool that would be used in the operation, and they kept meeting each other and using their personal mobile phones to talk about the heist. All of these errors, besides the well-organized work of the detectives, led to the gang's downfall. We have come to the end of our story. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.